Hey, Clyde, come here and look at this. The sign that says, Fetid Fields, mortal danger, proceed at your own risk.
Oh, bud. I don't know if we're meant to be here.
Welcome, dear listeners, to Season 2, Scarecrow Tales. If you're looking for food, you won't find any over this way, Gwen.
Hello, Jack. I think I'll introduce this week's tales, if I may. And yes, straw is certainly no substitute for flesh and blood, unfortunately.
Oh, there's flesh and blood in there. It's just not mine, Wendigo.
Gwen doesn't do leftovers. Anyway, this week we bring you a special episode to celebrate fatal females like myself. February is Women in Horror Month, and I wanted to come here and show my support. All of these tales were written by some of the most amazing women in the horror community.
Alright. Grab a chair and settle into our fit.
Gather round, fellow fear fanatics, as we transport you through terror after terror, all brought to life by some amazing female narrators. Check out their pages and show your support.
A familiar woman runs toward me. A small child's perched on each hip, jostling with every one of her fervent steps. One is crying from having just been preemptively unlatched from her still hanging breast.
Della? Oh my goddess! Hello!
She wraps me up in a protective hug, each child's face squished awkwardly against both sides of my chest. Hello, I respond confidently. I wonder how long we're going to play the small talk game before she realizes I don't remember her whatsoever, let alone her name. How have you been? Goddess, it's been so long. It's been, what, how many years now? I ask her, hoping her answer will lead to some kind of recognition.
Easily since 10th grade. Your cousin came to the compound just before we moved. My family left after... well, it's not important. All that matters is I'm here now. The month I turned 18, I walked out my front door, drove out here, and never looked back.
Jesus, I think to myself. Why the fuck would anyone who actually got to escape ever want to come back? My family's been stuck here our whole lives. They don't acknowledge any other way of life. A pert clear of her throat breaks me from my inner monologue.
What about you? How have you been doing? Your hair has gotten so long. You've always been such a pretty little thing. Have you made your contribution? Murph and I have 6 now. Can you believe it?
She inquires, eyes alight with the anticipation of my response. I knew this was coming. I'm just surprised it took her so long. Yep, I have a daughter, Sasha. She's 7 years old. It took us a little while at first, but she was worth every heartbreak along the way. The smile I've practiced to the point of obsession peels across my lips. It's extremely important to crinkle the corners of my eyes to make it look real. No one's gonna believe me if I'm dead-faced.
Just one, then? Are you planning for another?
The woman asks warily. I still don't know her goddamn name. Well, this was certainly new. Usually telling these people I have a child, a daughter no less, satiates them enough to stop their questions. The smile fades from my face one muscle at a time in preparation for the next part of my answer. No, not yet anyway. We lost Sasha's father when she was 5. I haven't gathered the courage to try again. Her face puckers like she just performed fellatio on a lemon.
Oh, goddess, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Me and my big mouth, right? Listen, I've been married a long time, but you can always talk to me, all right? Give me your phone so I can give you my number.
Finally, I'll know her damn name. Of course, thank you so much. I'd like that. She types in her contact information and hands it back. Maya. Her name is Maya. Okay. One more smile makes an appearance on my face as I turn to leave the encounter. My feet almost make it out of the aisle when I hear her call after me.
You know, it's never too late, right? Children are our future. You never know what contribution your children will make to our world.
That conversation pretty much sums up all you need to know about the community that we live in. A flyer for the town meeting is perched under my windshield wiper. I remove it with more than a little annoyance and get in my car. The drive home depresses me. I've driven it dozens, if not hundreds of times. I know where all the holes in the fence are. Sasha and I always sing a silly song during these parts to distract her. But I look. Years of conditioning and cognitive mental therapy scream at me not to look. But I do every time, just the same. Passing glances provide me different views of horror. The women are dirty, literally dressed in rags. Their faces are haunted with years of neglect. To our town, they are refuse, a waste of human populace. Being childless robbed them of the blessings and way of life the contributors experienced. The barren, as they call them, are forced to contribute in other ways. These women are farmhands, overworked cooks, not even allowed to eat the food they make, landfill workers, medicinal experimentees, and so forth. And I am supposed to be one of them. My mind takes me back to a place and time just before Sasha became mine. A distant wailing woke Sharon and I from a deep sleep one evening. Our limbs lingered in their embrace longer than necessary for the situation, hoping it was the remnants of a dream. Sharon was the first one dressed. She ushered me over to our bedroom window to peer outside. I ran over to her, almost forgetting to leave the socially acceptable amount of space between our anxious bodies. The street looked quiet, empty even. No one was outside. Everything was still, save for the shivering of the leaves from the cold night air. Only one car was on the street. The lights inside were on, and the silhouette of the person inside was completely immobile. It was definitely apparent that they weren't the one making the noise. Although Sharon challenged me, I was the one who went outside to investigate. Someone out there needed help. I was sure of it. Each step toward the car felt like it slowed a consecutive second in time. Each step toward the car felt like it slowed a consecutive moment in time. The last step seemed to take hours. My hand froze mere inches before knocking on the glass. The scene seized any communication between my brain and my body. I found myself temporarily frozen in place, my sanity not allowing me to move until I could make sense of what I was seeing. A dark-haired woman sat at the driver's seat. She didn't look to be much younger than myself at the time. Her once brown eyes were cloudy and lifeless, frozen in an eternal 1,000-yard stare. There's foam crystallized at the corners of her lips, and a needle hung limp in her arm, still embedded in a vein. The worst part of all this was what was in the back seat. A red-faced baby girl, not more than 3 or 4 months old, cried incessantly in her car seat. Her voice was strained from calling out. Her eyes were just barely to the point of producing tears. I unbuckled her and rocked her in my arms, making sure to survey the street for onlookers or gapped curtains. Thankfully, there were none. Sharon gently took the baby from me and held her to her chest. In a split-second moment of doubt, I ran out and unbuckled the car seat to take inside with me. Looking back now, it's a miracle we held together through it all. Timing was heavily in our favor. Whether it was God or Goddess, someone was definitely on our side that year. I've always been a bigger gal. It wasn't too much of a stretch to assume I was pregnant and didn't show much. A close friend in need of a home agreed to act as her father in exchange for a place to live. I wasn't lying earlier when I said we lost him when Sasha was 5. Not everyone can make it here. The way people are raised makes them truly believe they can't have a successful life anywhere else. Mitch ate a bullet one night after dinner, and that was that. I kept to myself mostly. No one could know too much if they didn't get too close. And if you hadn't guessed by now, Sharon is not my cousin. Love doesn't mean much to a community that only cares about repopulation. If anyone knew what we really were, we'd be taken to the municipal office cells and offered what they call a choice. Those who are found to be living against their way of life are brought into rooms full of voracious male occupants, their pants clinging tightly to the growing bulges of their groins as they stare hungrily at whichever woman is brought in, like a raw steak tossed to a pit of starving hounds. Town leaders arrive and offer 2 options to our kind. Women could consent to repeated sexual encounters with each of the men, or choose not to and be tossed outside the walls of the comfortable compound with the other wastes of society. Those who chose the first option were housed and subjected to constant breeding rituals until they became pregnant. If conception failed after 1 calendar year, then they also became exiled outside of the compound walls for being a non-contributing member. Rules were set into place to protect the physical safety of the women forced to live outside the confines of our walls, but they aren't usually enforced. More men travel outside the walls each day to pillage and violate those poor women, each being allowed discreet entry back after their varied conquests. Women beaten, sometimes to the point of death, are provided no medical care. If someone gets sick, they're weeded out to make room for those more physically able to perform their tasks. It isn't right, but who's there to stop them? The leaders that would hear the cries for justice are the very ones that put those rules there in the first place. Flyers about town meetings were all over. It seemed like every telephone pole, store bulletin board, and town mailbox were inundated with them. Everyone seemed swept up in it. Even Sharon talked about going once or twice. Maybe it would look better if we went to blend in rather than stay away completely. At any rate, it doesn't matter now. I just want to love on my girls. Sasha's curls bounced playfully as she ran out to greet me. Even though she'll be taller than me soon, I still see that little red-faced baby, screaming in the face of death in that car. "How's it going, baby girl? Did you have a good day today? I missed you," I ask as I throw my arms around her, grocery bags hanging off wrists and all. She sees me struggling and takes the lighter bags so I can distribute the weight of the heavier ones more evenly. She's always been so sweet. It must have come from her biological family. I was a terribly hateful child. It was made very apparent to me at an early age that I would have to fight for my right to be happy and safe in the world I grew up in. It resulted in a very guarded and lonely upbringing. My daughter looks at me with sudden concern. "Mama, Sharon isn't doing so good today. She's been doing that thing where she doesn't hear me and just stares out the window. It creeps me out when she does that." I try my best to force a giggle to pass it off as quirkiness or the effects of her mother being a deep thinker. In all reality, though, I know what's coming. Every once in a great while, my love gets down. Really down. Like so down she can look up at a clear sky for hours and still not see the sun. It kills her that she can't be open about who she is. Who we are. She hates it that she has to act like an extended family member to Sasha instead of her mother. So many times in public we've wanted to kiss, stare longingly. Even a small brush of hands would mean so much sometimes. We can't do that, though. Not to mention she's under pressure for not adding a contribution of her own. She's filed appeal after appeal, but her time has come due. She has 4 months left to become pregnant, but she refuses to share her body with anyone but me, no matter what the cost. It's been affecting our sleep as well. I'd feel her fitful tossing and turning against me as we slept. Some nights I'd roll over and she wouldn't even be there at all. For the sake of the stress of that damn meeting in the early morning, I selfishly hope tonight isn't one of those nights. 2 melatonin gummies have me feeling relaxed and ready to fall asleep in a little over 20 minutes. My honey was on her own tonight. This bitch needs some much-deserved sleep. Terrible dreams chase me all through my sleep. Suffocating plumes of smoke surround the room that I'm in. It's very familiar, but yet not immediately recognizable at the same time. Men are clutching at their throats blindly. Some have blood and gore running down their face from gouged eyes. Others have deep black-red stains spreading on the groins of their pants. Flames licked at the air from behind a closed door. No one could escape, and the fire wouldn't be held back for long. My body jolts awake with a start. The taste of screams and ash still flavor my tongue. I cry out to Sharon through horrified tears, only to find that she isn't next to me. The sun's just starting to flirt with the tops of the trees. Daybreak has barely threatened to arrive. The air feels off. Our home is a little too peaceful. Everything is unsettlingly still. The acoustics of the floorboards let me know that I'm about to enter a room with a heavy object in the middle of the floor. Sharon, it's me, sweetheart. Are you alright, babe? I had a soul fucking nightmare and I need cuddles, okay? My feet stop dead in their tracks. My body movements in response to the sight before me instantly take me back to finding Sasha as a baby. Sharon is okay. She is alive. She is smiling. But she's definitely not the same. The love of my life sits in a disheveled clump on our living room floor. Her forearms and face are covered in blood, gore, and soot. 2 orbs with brown irises are clenched tightly in her left hand.
Dells, my dearest, it's all going to be okay. I got those evil bastards, and no one will ever have to hide who they are again. I've finally made my contribution. Have you made your contribution by N.M. Brown, my buddy?
Cornelia closed the door behind her in a hurry. Her hands moved swiftly towards the key inside of her pocket and locked it. A loud bang was heard from the other side of the door. The man had been chasing her down and now she had nowhere to go, locked inside a room without windows. She stepped away from the door and moved backwards. She yelped as he slammed a fist on the door again. "I know you're in there! Open this damn door!" he yelled. Cornelia took a deep breath. Her eyes wide open from fear as she was unsure what her next move should be. She turned around shaky and insecure. There were 2 more women inside of the room. When her eyes met theirs, she finally spoke up. "I can do this! Please let me go home!" Cornelia cried out. The woman on the right gave her a stern look. It seemed so icy cold that Cornelia was not sure if it was safer to be inside or outside of the room she was standing in. "This is our job. You signed up for this. Now you need to learn how to finish it," the woman on the right replied. "Signed up? You 2 forced me to do this. This is my life. This is my body. And you can't get to decide for me," she yelled back. The woman on the left covered her ears for a moment and gave Cornelia a shy look. "Cornelia, I didn't like it either the first time. But you learn how to cope with it. Besides, what are we going to do if a boss finds out?" Cornelia looked at her feet for a moment when that comment was dropped. She covered her face with her hands and tears began to stream down. Do you think it will make a difference? Either that guy or our boss is going to kill us, Emma. The woman on the right gave her an angry look. I am not going to let anyone harm us or even lay a finger on us. There are 3 of us and only 1 on the other side of that door. We can do this, but only if you take the courage to step outside. Another bang on the door was heard. It was not as powerful as the last couple of ones. Cornelia heard the man drop to his knees. She turned around and looked at the door. Please, let me in. I need to talk to you. This is not who you are. The woman started to feel pity for the man. A part of her now indeed wanted to open the door, but not for the reason the 2 girls gave. She turned back to face the 2. Emma looked in her eyes. Please, Cornelia, do it for us, she said, as tears were falling from her face on the floor. Don't listen to them, the man on the other side screamed. There was fear in his voice. Take the scalpel from the bag we gave to you. There should be a small bag with powder inside of it as well. It's devil's breath, so it should keep him under for a couple of hours. We need to harvest his organs, or else our boss will take ours. Cornelia nodded in response. Very well then, Claire. You win, but after today, you won't hear from me again. Cornelia cut open the small bag and dropped some of the powder on the palm of her hand. She looked one last time at the mirror and turned to the door. Her 2 reflections vanished as she stepped closer. This is my body, she thought, but also our body. She took a deep breath and unlocked the door. A man with brown hair and green eyes was sitting on the floor. He looked at her, puzzled for a slight second before realizing his fate. His face changed into that can only be described as disappointed and frightened. He looked up and made an attempt to throw a punch. Cornelia blew the powder into his face. She saw him drop to the floor. Nice work, Emma said. Let's get to work, Claire replies.
The Other Grandma by KB Hurst. I stood in my kitchen rolling dough for my famous Italian wedding cookies and chatting on the phone with my daughter-in-law Tracy. Oh, he's so excited to see you this weekend, Camille. Jared keeps telling me, Grandma has horses and she makes me lots of sweets. I don't think he's thought about anything else. I smiled. Well, you just tell him I'm just as excited as he is. And I'm so sorry it couldn't be under better circumstances. Yeah, I know, Tracy said sadly. My cousin and I have not seen each other in years. I'm so sad about it. They said our cancer spread too quickly. Well, you just let me know if you and Martin need anything at all. Thanks, Camille. Tracy sighed in relief. I was going to have my grandson, Jared, for 2 whole days, while my son Martin and his wife Tracy drove to Buffalo for her cousin's funeral. It was the first time I was going to have my 4-year-old grandson overnight. I was excited about it, and had been baking his favorite cookies and treats for the last week. I mean, what sort of grandma would I be if I didn't spoil my little grandson? The day he arrived, my son Martin was quite relieved to have a mini break. Just so that you know, he hasn't been sleeping much, and because of it, I haven't been sleeping either. Oh, that's okay. I remember you had the same problem about Jared's age. I winked. Mom, no, this isn't a wetting the bed thing. He wakes up at odd times of the night, and I catch him talking to no one. On one occasion, I found him outside on our back deck, just standing there. And he likes to tell the craziest stories about things, too. I think he just has an overactive imagination. I mean, you know how kids are. I just think he's sleepwalking, and, well, we plan to see a doctor when we get back. Just wanted to warn you so you know what to expect. I looked at my worried son and nodded, saying nothing. I figured I could handle my grandson well on my own. After all, I had raised 3 sons, and if you count my late husband, 4 boys in all. I kissed Martin on the cheek and hugged Tracy, as they had to get on the road. I took my grandson into the house. We settled down, and I got out a board game. Well, which one do you want to play first? I asked him. He looked at me. His dark curly hair fell into ringlets around his head, and he looked at all 4 board games very seriously, and then pointed to Candyland. I smiled. Good choice. I opened the box and set up the game. We smiled and played for about an hour, and then I made Jared some snacks and we watched a bit of television. I have a dog poodle mix named Sam that needed to go out, so Jared and I walked Sam around my block, the neighborhood. I let Jared help me hold the leash, and we walked and talked. Once we completed our walk around the block, Jared and I had dinner, and then it was time for us to relax. I let Jared play in the bathtub while I made him some hot cocoa. It wasn't long before Jared soon was asleep, and I picked him up and carried him to the spare room where he would be sleeping for the night. I call it an extra bedroom, but it was the bedroom his father shared with his brother growing up. Once he was safe and sound, I shut the door, leaving it cracked so that some of the light in the bathroom would assist him in seeing in the hallway, just in case he had to get up in the middle of the night. I went to my room and watched the news, then turned off the television, and before I knew it, I was fast asleep myself. The very next morning, Jared woke up sometime after 9 a.m., and I let Sam out the back door to do his business when Jared stood next to me watching the dog. My other grandma says that Sam is not going to live long. I looked down at him, puzzled as to where he got that information. What? Who said that? My other grandma. She came to my window last night. Funny, she looks exactly like you, Cam. I figured it must be a dream he had had, and so I shrugged it off. Well, Sam is 10 years old. I hope he can make it a little longer. Jared, what do you want for breakfast? I don't want anything. My other grandma says I need to eat less processed foods. I looked at the boy, utterly stunned at what he was saying. I knew his father did mention he was acting a little strangely. I figured he must have had one heck of a dream. Well, I'm having eggs, and eggs aren't processed food. If you want, I can make you an egg. I think eggs should be fine, but no toast, I think. I smiled and shook my head, not thinking much about it. The 2 of us hung out that morning, and then Jared asked if he could go outside and play. Only where I can see you, I said, pointing to the patio doors. Okay, Grandma, he said, as his chubby legs ran outside with his basketball. I looked at him, and then went over to sit in front of the kitchen table where I could see him. My yard was fenced in with a tall wooden fence, and even though I knew we couldn't go anywhere, I still felt the need to keep an eye on him. I read the newspaper and sipped on some tea while I kept my eyes on Jared. I stood up from time to time to ensure he was where I told him to be. I had only blinked for a second when I picked up my newspaper, turned the page to an article about some corrupt politician, when I looked up, and Jared was gone, ball and all. I jumped up and ran to the back door to see where he had gone. I looked around and spun myself in circles. There was no way. No way he got out of my backyard. I didn't even have a gate, and there was no way Jared climbed the fence. Jared! No sound came. All I heard were the birds chirping in the distance. It was as though time had frozen entirely in ice. I felt strange. I couldn't move from fear. It had taken over my body and mind. Where was my grandson? Then I heard the tiniest peep coming from the window in the room Jared shared while he was staying with me. The window was open for some reason, and I could hear laughing. Jared, is that you? I ran to the back of the house, and Jared was sitting on the floor laughing. When he looked up at me, he stopped laughing and looked almost surprised to see me standing in the doorway. "Hi, Grandma," he said, standing up and coming over to me. "Jared, how did you get back in the house?" I was genuinely frightened and puzzled, because to do so he would have had to find his way over the fence in the backyard and walked around to the front door, which was locked. "You helped me." "What?" "Other Grandma, the one that looks like you. She helped me get in. She said if I closed my eyes, we could play a game. I closed my eyes, and I was here when I opened them." I was growing terrified now, and I wasn't sure what to do. "Jared, you know that when you tell lies that aren't very nice, it makes people not trust you. Tell Grandma the truth. How did you get in here?" Jared grew upset then and looked at me with tears streaming down his face. "I told you. The other Grandma." He began to cry then, and I knew he was telling the truth. But how? I had no idea, because none of it was making any sense. I locked all the doors and the windows and had Jared sleep in my bed his last night there. I also warned him to stop talking to the other Grandma. To be honest, it frightened me. And when Martin and Tracy came to pick up Jared the next morning, I explained what he had been telling me. "You see, Mom, that's why we want to take him to see a doctor. You see, before we dropped him off, he had been telling us that his other parents wanted him to come live with them. It frightened Tracy so severely that she nearly had a nervous breakdown. We just didn't mention it." I sat shocked, listening to what Martin had described to me. That afternoon, Martin and Tracy drove Jared home, and I remained perplexed. My son and daughter-in-law seemed very worried when they left. I had offered to let them all stay at least a night at my house so they didn't have to make up a long drive back home. Martin declined, to say he just wanted to get home as fast as he could and get Jared back on his routine. Tracy looked pale and quite ill, and I hugged her tighter than usual when they left. Since the incident at my house, no other strange events have occurred with Jared, and he no longer talks about needing to go live with his other parents. In fact, Martin called me 3 days after he had picked Jared up from my home and seemed unusually in high spirits. I was a bit baffled because I had never heard my son speak so excitedly or positive before about anything. "Well, you sound better, Martin," I said while I listened to him laughing on the other end of the phone. He sounded positively giddy. "Oh, I am, Mom. Jared had another visit with me, the doctor, and I told him that now, and he told them he's now living with his other parents. The doctor thinks it's just his imagination. It's normal for children to create worlds inside their mind at such a young age." "Well, that's wonderful," I said, genuinely happy, and yet a little weirded out by Martin's overly positive tone. "You and Tracy doing okay then?" "Oh yeah, Mom." He turned the phone over to Tracy, who was equally as positive. "Oh, hi, Camille. Isn't the news wonderful? Jared is doing so great. We're all planning a trip to Disneyland in the fall. You should come. They say it's the happiest place on earth." We'll see. I ended the conversation with Tracy because the kitchen timer went off, and it meant dinner was ready. Martin took over the conversation once again. "Mom, I think your roast smells delicious." I thought it was strange. It was a very strange thing to say. I figured my son was making a joke. How he knew what I was cooking, I have no idea. I never mentioned it. We ended the conversation shortly after. I had listened to his enthusiasm, and I was generally happy for him that Jared was doing better. The following week, I was at our local grocery store in Akron, and I was at the checkout lane with my several or so items when the cashier looked at me and laughed. "You must be having one of those days, ma'am." I'm sorry?" "You see, you must need more canned beans because you were just here," she laughed. "Oh, you must have me mistaken for someone else." She looked at me then and shook her head. No, lady, unless you have a twin that wears the same clothes you were in a few minutes ago, as in maybe seconds." I looked at her and then thought about what Jared had said about the other Grandma. "If you don't mind my asking a strange question, which way did I go when I left?" "Just out the main doors. said the cashier, looking at me as though I were completely mentally ill. I left the cashier's lane and ran out the door, looked around, hoping to see something, but I did not see my doppelganger. I thought of Jared. It made me curious. Maybe it was nothing. I didn't want to think about the strange occurrence between Jared and me that weekend, or the other incident at the grocery store. But it was always in the back of my mind now. When Martin had told me about Jared saying he went to live with his other parents.
Hey, this is Sinister, sweetheart. I wanted to take a little time out to let you be the first ones to get in on the ground floor of a new up-and-coming podcast called No Sick Days and Death. After cheating death, a woman is forced to become the new Grim Reaper. She soon learns there are no sick days in death. And then be on the lookout for more information. I take a step back from the banner I'm hanging and smile. In large purple block letters it reads, "Happy Virus Appreciation Day!" The students begin to enter, and I smile at them as well. "Happy Virus Appreciation Day, boys and girls!"
"You too, ma'am,"
James answers. As the oldest at 12, he usually speaks for the rest of the class. "Today you will read from your themes about the origins of our great holiday. As it's Tuesday, Supply and Meeting Day, you'll be expected to work quietly on your own this afternoon. When I return, I'll check your progress. Remember, completed work will be rewarded and goofing off will be punished." I make eye contact with each child and quickly glance at the cabinet containing the box. I see all four faces turn a bit whiter. And the youngest, 5-year-old Sarah, actually tears up. "Great!" I use my happiest voice. "Let's get started!" The first couple hours pass by as usual. We practice handwriting and math, a little home ec, and then on to history. "All right, boys and girls, time for holiday fun!" We play bingo using the names of the cities and towns destroyed by the virus, with pieces of gum as prizes. Sarah grabs her piece and begins to chew it without asking. The others notice my frown, and Sean gestures to Sarah. At least he knows better than to speak without permission. As I reach up to the cabinet key, Sarah looks up. Quickly, she spits out the gum, her first treat in over a month, and stands. Though pale and silently crying now, she steels herself and stands tall next to her desk.
"I'm sorry, ma'am. May I please have the ruler?"
Anna and Jeff begin crying now, and even James tears up at what she's asking for. I give Sarah a hard look, but she doesn't falter. This one's going to be a problem soon, just like the older boy Thomas. I glance up at the clock. Damn it! It's already 11 o'clock. I don't have time for this today. I give Sarah my best smile. "Well, maybe I can give you a warning. Maybe I can just give you a warning since it's a holiday. Sit down." The children were visibly relieved, and Sarah takes her seat. I sit at my desk in front of the chalkboard. "James, let's hear a little of your essay." James stands in front of the little group, straight and tall, speaking clearly as he was taught.
5 years ago, during the last World War, a virus was accidentally released on Earth. Made to be a weapon, it cleansed the Earth of 85% of the population. Those lucky enough to be immune moved underground until it becomes safe to live outside.
I jump in as he pauses. "And why do we celebrate this?"
Virus Appreciation Day reminds us to be grateful for what we have and to learn from our mistakes.
That's right. Soon we will move back to the surface and help with rebuilding. That's why Meeting Day is so important. Today, I traveled to the meeting place and received the weekly message from our leaders. Finish your afternoon assignments and I'll grade them when I return. Walking out, I stop in the doorway to watch James passing out the workbooks. I know they'll work until I return, no matter how late. Fear of the box keeps them in line. Down the hallway, I grab my bag and protective gear, through the tunnel and into the airlock. Here I get into my hazmat suit and mask. out of the airlock and into the warehouse that protects our bunker. Walking around a wall, I unlock the Jeep as I approach. Here, I cannot be seen from the airlock. Quickly, I strip out of the stifling suit and mask and change into a t-shirt and jeans. Time to blend in. I use the garage door opener and drive the Jeep toward the center of the city. Parking in front of the building always sets me at ease. Welcome to Barnes & Noble Cafe. What can I get started for you today? Latte in hand, I walk towards the back where the mothers group meets. Sitting down, I greet the other moms, just like every Tuesday. I just love homeschooling. It gives you so much freedom. Virus Appreciation Day was written by Miller's Minion at reddit.com and was narrated Sinister, Sweetheart, and Vader.
Shadavar by Mythology Loves Horror. 2 weeks ago, I went camping at Zargos Mountains as part of a last-minute post-college unwinding session. I was getting ready to start working at a local law firm, but I wanted to see a little more of the world before too much time passed. On an impulse, I bought myself a ticket, and 3 days later, I was flying out of the Boston International Airport. 29 hours later, I was standing at one of the trailheads, which started in the southwestern corner of the Iranian Plateau, and ran for 14 miles until it merged with another trail. While I didn't have any idea about the local geography, I did have some pretty good navigation items on me, and the path was so straightforward that I wasn't worried about getting lost. My plan was to take 2 days to hike this trail. Then I'd head on to one of the big cities and some of the nightlife. I'd maybe find myself a girl or two to show me around. Then I'd head back home by the end of the week. It was a foolproof plan. And I couldn't wait for my first night in the woods. Everything went perfectly that day. I covered the first 7 miles. Then I set up camp in a small grove of oak trees. I hadn't seen another person out there, and the trail looked less used than I'd expected. But I loved how much wildlife I'd seen. I made a fire and heated up one of my dad's MRE dinners. And to my surprise, the military packaged beef stew didn't taste bad at all. Before heading to bed, I made sure that everything was stored away carefully so that animals wouldn't try to get into anything. I fell asleep within minutes of crawling into my tent. Sometime later, I woke up and it took a moment to remember where I was. I lay still, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of my slumber. After a few minutes, I didn't hear anything, so I wrote it off as a dream and fell back into a light sleep. The next time I woke, I could see the moon shining through the tent window, and I could hear soft, lovely music. My first thought was that it sounded like the kind of flute you hear in Celtic songs. But the longer I listened, the more it sounded ethereal and out of sync. It was as though multiple instruments were playing, and the rest of the nocturnal forest sounds had ceased. I untangled myself from my sleeping bag and I carefully unzipped my tent so that it didn't make any abrupt noise. I didn't think I was in any particular danger, but I wanted to be cautious, since it was admittedly weird to randomly hear music in the middle of nowhere at roughly 3 a.m. I let my eyes adjust to the moonlight. With it being a full moon, I could see my campsite well enough. Everything was in place, and I didn't see anyone around. The music sounded like it was coming from far off to one side of the clearing, and it didn't sound particularly close. I popped my head back into my tent long enough to grab boots and a flashlight. Then I closed the tent up behind me and began following the music. I was intensely curious, and I figured that if I maintained a good distance from the sound, no one would ever know I was there. I crept along the edge of the clearing, trying to keep to the shadows while making my footfalls light. I followed the haunting music into the darkness, my senses on overdrive as I tried to track it. I wasn't the best woodsman, but I like to think I could handle this. After about 10 minutes, I came to a halt, my chest squeezing in a moment of blinding panic. Whomever was playing the music was probably perfectly friendly, but on the off chance that they weren't, I realized I was defenseless. Sure, I could always punch them, but that wouldn't do me much good if they had another weapon on them or could take a hit. I began checking the ground near me, and I soon found a sturdy, thick branch that seemed like it could do some damage if necessary. I tucked it under my arm, cradling it to me as I advanced. It took me another 5 minutes, but I soon found out the source of the music. As I got closer, I shut my flashlight off, and I waited to see who was there. It took my brain a moment to process what I was seeing. I had expected a person to be sitting at the campfire playing music, but all I saw was a deer. The clearing, it was flooded with moonlight, and the lighting was bright enough that I wish I had my camera with me. After a minute, it raised its head from the berry bush it had been grazing on, and that was when I saw it wasn't a deer. Its single antler was long and spiraled, almost like that of a gazelle, but I could see that each prong had a hole in it. The antler was acting like a pan flute, since it made a musical sound whenever the breeze blew across them. I studied it in fascination, and that's when I realized that we weren't alone. Along the edge of the clearing, several animals had poked out their heads, and they were cautiously surveying their surroundings. They were all drawn towards the deer-like creature, and they seemed to be as interested in the music as I was. Each time the wind blew, the animals crept a little closer, and soon I could see there was a weird mix of them. There was a couple of striped hyenas, a snake, some Persian fallow deer, some rabbits, and even a cow. I didn't even realize that Iran had whatever the deer thing was, much less hyenas, so that came as a surprise. As I tried to identify the rest of the animals, a violent gust of wind began blowing, and the once silent animals instantly turned agitated. Over the enraged sound of hisses, growls, bellows, and thumps, I could hear the music soar, but now it had a heavier, more aggressive quality to it. The animals began to turn on each other, and soon it was a war. Biting, clawing, kicking, and stomping began to kill them off, until only 2 animals remained. The cow and one of the hyenas stood panting as they faced off against each other. They were covered in bloody gashes, and the cow looked like it was missing an eye. As the violent song died down, the cow shook its head as if it was trying to get a fly out of its ear, and the hyena let out a confused, scared whimper. Throughout the carnage, the horned thing had stood in the same spot, and I don't think it had moved a muscle. It finally stepped away from the bush, carefully stepping over carcasses and gore, until it stood in front of the remaining animals. They held their ground and the hyena began growling. The deer-like creature shook its head, and a piercing whistle-like sound came from its horn. It startled the animals, who both skittered away. I had no idea what I had just witnessed. It had happened so brutally and quickly that it had been hard to keep track of any one animal, and I had to force myself to keep breathing steadily so that I wouldn't vomit. I'd never seen bloodshed like that, and I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. As I began to back away, the creature daintily made its way to the center of the clearing, and to my disgust, it began feeding on the slain animals. I could hear bones snapping wetly, and that was when my stomach betrayed me. I vomited, and when I finally stopped heaving, it was gone. I could smell the blood and viscera in the air, which sent my stomach into another wave of nauseated cramps. I made it back to my tent, practically crawling at some points, and that night I barely slept. What little sleep I did get was filled with nightmares, and without hesitation, I cut my trip short. When I had internet service again, I spent some time trying to find what that creature was. It seemed like it was a Shadavar. The easiest way to explain it is by calling it a carnivorous unicorn, and they were thought to have gone extinct hundreds of years ago. The type of animals they like eating respond to their sound of their horn, and that's when it's too late for the prey to escape. It's a fascinating creature, but I hope I never see one again.
Don't look at the man wrapped in plastic. My uncle is a police officer. He typically does highway patrol and doesn't like to talk about work a lot because it's both mundane and unpleasant, and it's very rare something amusing happens. No one wants to hear about fatal accidents and speeding stops. They want to hear the story about the drunken college student who couldn't remember how to put his pants back on in the middle of an intersection during morning rush hour. Unfortunately, the funny stories are few and far between, so mostly he doesn't say anything. When I turned 16, my uncle had me drop by the police station, ostensibly to pick up something for my mom. It was a ruse. I found myself confronted by a number of his coworkers, took me aside, and had the talk with me. 2 talks, actually. One about going off to college in a few years and the dangers I would face, and to never leave my drink unattended, and don't walk around by myself after dark, and blah, 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 blah. The other was about driving. Cell phones weren't in heavy use at the time, so they didn't talk about texting, but they did warn me against having a lot of noisy friends in the car, always wearing a seatbelt, driving defensively, etc. I'd heard all of it before, but it was nice that he cared about my safety, I suppose. There was one officer, however, who told me something I hadn't heard. He was an older gentleman, probably near retirement, and he hung near the edge of the group, until everyone was done with their stories meant to scare me into smart choices. Then he said he'd take me to say hi to my uncle, who was at his desk, and he told me something strange on the way there. "There's a man wrapped in plastic in the city," he said. "He hangs out around the edges of the highway. If you see him, don't look at his face. He'll be mostly covered, so you won't see it unless you really look." "If you can't see his face, then how do you know it's a man?" I asked. I was a bit testy from being ambushed by all my uncle's coworkers and was not in the mood to indulge in ghost stories. "I guess I don't," he admitted. "But that's not important. Every now and then," he said, "they'd respond to an accident caused by a man covered in plastic. A motorist would spot a piece of trash by the side of the road, a big piece standing upright, and it would be wrapped in just the right way that it looked like a human figure. Just some stray debris blown around by the wind. Initially, the police thought the resulting accidents or near misses that occurred were from momentary distraction of trying to understand what they'd seen. But reports kept coming, and the trend was unmistakable. A human figure, swaddled in plastic, wrapped tight like the winding of a corpse. Even the head was covered. Everyone that saw it had crashed shortly after or had a near miss. Everyone that saw the man's face died. I laughed a little and, thinking myself smart, asked how they knew seeing his face was the trigger if all the people that saw it died shortly after. His jaw tightened, and something in me trembled, realizing that I'd asked something painful to him, a memory he tried to suppress. I began to think that maybe there was something to his story. He told me he'd responded to an accident many years ago. The man driving had survived. His wife had not. The man was hysterical, and the officer had tried to pull him away from the scene, tried to get him to go to the waiting ambulance. Anything to make him stop looking at his wife's crushed body. He remembered amidst the man's babbling that this was his fault and that he'd killed his wife. Untrue, but it was understandable that he'd blame himself. That the man had said he'd seen someone standing by the side of the road, and he'd glanced only briefly, but his wife had turned in her seat to look back at him and see what the figure was doing. She'd started screaming, something about their face, how it was all wrong, and she had to get away from it. She started clawing at the door, trying to open it. And that's when the vehicle in the other lane had swerved without explanation and hit the passenger side, killing his wife. "That's really fucked up," I said when he was finished, and his lips narrowed into a thin line, and he told me I shouldn't swear like that and didn't say anything else about the man in plastic. I asked my uncle about it later. He looked uncomfortable and shrugged and told me it was true that they had a lot of reports about a man in plastic. Just be careful, he said. Don't be distracted by anything on the side of the road, whether mundane or some weird local ghost story. It's been many years since that talk, and the idea of a man wrapped in plastic stuck with me. I'm not superstitious. I figure there had to be a logical explanation, that maybe people were mistaken in what they saw and the police were looking for a pattern that wasn't there. Well, if that's all there was to it, I wouldn't be posting. A few weeks ago, I saw the man in plastic. It was exactly as the older police officer said. He was unremarkable, merely another piece of debris blown up against the barrier separating the two sides of the highway. I would have paid it no attention if it weren't for the curve of the shoulders, the line of the legs. Unmistakably a human figure, slate gray like an overcast sky, crinkled with musty light from the reflection of the plastic. I thought at first it was a man in a hoodie, inexplicably and dangerously leaning on the barrier in the middle of the highway. Then, as my car approached, I realized it was one solid piece covering him from head to toe. Looked like a funeral wrap, I thought, from the old tradition of winding the body in a sheet. My car drew even with where he stood. He shifted, his shoulders twisted, and he began to turn his head to me. I remembered my uncle's warning. I tore my eyes away just in time to see something fall from the vehicle in front of me. I thought in that instant that it was a washing machine that had fallen out of the back of the pickup in front of me. Later, after the police arrived, I realized it was something much bigger and far more sturdy, which helped explain what happened to the car that was right behind me. I swerved into the other lane. My uncle had told me to always keep track of where other cars are so that I knew where it was safe to maneuver in an emergency. And I'd been doing that, and I knew there were no cars riding along beside me. I missed the debris. The car that had been following perhaps a little too close behind me? Not so lucky. The front end of his car clipped the machinery. I saw it turn sideways, spinning from the impact. Saw it roll. It came to a stop in the grass on the shoulder. I pulled over, braking as hard as I dared, fumbling for my cell phone with shaking hands. I called 911, gave them my location, and then, disoriented and perhaps a little in shock, dropped the phone and went to go check on the other driver. The damage to his car was less than I expected. The frame was bent near the top of the driver's side door, the sides were dented, and the windshield was shattered. But that was all. He wasn't moving as I approached, and I honestly don't know why I kept going. He's dead, he's dead, he's dead. was all that was running through my mind. But then he raised his head and stared about him in confusion. He reached up a hand and touched the shattered windshield in shock. Then I was there by the car, and he unlocked the door, and I wrenched it open. He looked fine. There were no visible injuries. A laptop lay in the passenger side floor. I saw his face, he whimpered at me. I saw it. And then he wrapped his arms around his body and began to rock back and forth and screamed. A long, plaintive scream, and when his lungs were empty, he sucked in another breath and began screaming again. I felt helpless. I tried to get him to stop. I grabbed his shoulder and tried to hold him against the seat so he'd stop rocking, and he began to twist and thrash instead, moaning and weeping. So I let him go, and he just sat there and rocked and screamed and wept about the face he had seen. He did this until the ambulance arrived to take him away. I've been having nightmares about this every single night since it happened. About the accident, watching that car tumble, helpless to do anything. I dream about a man screaming and rocking, and I'm trying to get to him to help, but he's always out of reach. And I dream about that man in plastic, and I wake up just before he turns to look at me, panting and shaking and cold with sweat. I'm crying a lot. I get panicky when I see a pickup with anything in the back, and after I stop, I have to sit there for a moment and catch my breath and wait for my heart to slow down. This is all normal, I feel, considering what happened. I'm trying to work through it, to not let it keep me from doing something so vital as driving. I've gotten an appointment with a therapist scheduled for next week. I found out what happened to that man. I asked my uncle, and he came over to my house that evening. He sat down at my kitchen table while I made tea and asked if I really wanted to know. And that was enough to indicate that the news was not going to be good. I sat down opposite him and said that, yes, I wanted to know. He died, my uncle told me. On the way to the hospital, he'd started growing more and more frantic and aggressive, screaming the same thing over and over again. The face was wrong. The face was wrong. The face was wrong. Then he'd gone into a seizure and was dead before they even reached the hospital. They believed the laptop, which was in the passenger side seat, had struck him in the head when the car rolled, which caused bleeding in the brain. I thanked him, said maybe knowing would give me some closure, and my uncle left. He seemed uncomfortable enough telling me that the man had died. So I didn't want to worry him further by saying I had seen the man in plastic. You see, I'm encountering him everywhere now. I catch glimpses of debris on the side of the road, dirty off-white sheets, shiny black tatters fluttering in the breeze, or stained gray scraps. And each time, I can't help but look, only for a moment, just long enough to realize that it has taken the shape of a man. I look back at the road before he can turn his head, before I see his face. I wonder, has he always been there and I'm finally noticing? Or is he targeting me? Should I have died instead of the man in the car behind me? I don't know. But if you see something like a man standing at the side of the highway, don't look. Keep driving. Don't look any longer than a second in case he turns his head and you see his face.
I hate my job sometimes, but being able to save people is still worth the horrifying and sometimes disgusting calls that my team responds to. Now, 6 years into my career as an EMT, I have to take sleeping medication because I can't stop having nightmares about the things I've seen. My more horrific memories range from babies with smashed-in heads who were run over by a car to whole families burned alive trying to escape a house fire. But while I can't unsee those memories, there's one in particular that still keeps me up at night. I was 18 and fresh out of high school when I faced my hardest call. It was my second month of work, and I was still getting the hang of waking up at 11 p.m. to a frantic phone call about a car accident or a shooting. I had just been having an amazing dream, something along the lines of Katy Perry just in pink cupcake armor while singing the medieval battle song, when my cell phone began ringing. The gruff, still sleepy voice on the other line was my boss, Abe, and we were needed at the scene of an accident. I was out of the door in 5 minutes, and I was on the scene 10 minutes after that. In a small New England town like this, everyone knows you by name, and tonight was no exception. The first person I noticed when I arrived was Mrs. Benway, the mother of the kid I had gone through every grade with. She was sobbing, her hands wringing together in a way that signaled distress. She kept glancing from the officer talking to her over to the woods behind her house, and as I made my way over to them, it didn't seem like he was getting much information out of her. I pulled him to the side and he briefed me on what happened. The missus there called us, saying that she and her 15-year-old son James were out walking their dog Barkton when a man jumped them. Apparently he clocked the kid over the head, then tried to snatch their pure-breed Dalmatian. The dog got out of his grip and ran off, and the assailant followed it. When the kid came to a few moments afterwards, he took off after them, and Mrs. Benway stayed here and called us. Wow, that's messed up. Didn't she file a report about someone trying to get her dog about a month ago as well? Yup, and this is the 4th purebred that's gone missing in the last 2 weeks. Well, at least this seems pretty straightforward. As much as I can tell. I think Sergeant Abraham wanted you to join the search team when you got here, just in case the kid passes out in the woods. Luckily, there's no snow yet, but it's damn cold. I had nodded in agreement, my mind already mapping the layout of the woods. I had grown up with the Benway boys and had played hide and seek in the 15 acres their family owned many times. I knew there was a creek as well as a large ravine, and both could be treacherous if someone was running blindly. Which way did they take off? The officer pointed directly behind the house, rather than to the hills off to either side. Straight back that way. Thanks. I left him, going over to the group of people that I assumed was the search party. Once Abe had us outfitted with flashlights, walkie-talkies, and bulletproof armor, he assigned each of us a quadrant of the woods to check in, and mine was the furthest away from where the assailant had gone to. As the rookie of the group, that would theoretically put me in the least amount of danger, and I was fine with that. We headed off, and within minutes, I had lost both sight and sound of the other group members. The large, sudden influx of humans had startled the nighttime wildlife, and the woods were eerily silent. In about half an hour, I had covered most of my quadrant and was about to radio in an all clear when I stopped. I thought that I had heard something, but after listening for a moment, I shrugged. It must have been the wind. "This is Mike. Quad 9 is all..." I stopped mid-sentence, my finger hovering carefully over the button. There was the sound again, and it was definitely barking. "Barkton? Come here, boy!" I heard an answering woof and began to follow the sound. I passed along the Western Creek bank, careful not to slip in the mud. Another bark steered me forward, and I couldn't keep the smile off of my face. For my 7th call, this wasn't bad, and hadn't even ended in the blood and gore that some of the others had. I was in high spirits, until I pushed my way through a nettle thicket and came to an abrupt halt. There, crouched 30 feet in front of me, was a man. His back was to me, but he let out an excited bark the way a dog does when its human comes home after work. Then he stood up, and instead of talking to me, he began singing. He turned to face me, and plastered to his face was a chunk of Barkton's fur. Jagged holes had been cut out for the man's eyes, and a shoestring was holding it in place as little chunks of Barkton slid down his cheek. I stood there in horrified silence, too stunned to even scream. I saw the glint of crimson-splashed knife in his hand, and I couldn't bear the tension any longer. I turned, fleeing as quickly as I could. I sent out a frantic radio message, even with knowing that they wouldn't be able to reach me before he caught up to me. At least they would be on their way, and maybe someone could subdue this insane canine killer. I was running blindly, my legs automatically bolting in sheer panic from the heavy footsteps behind me. I could hear him laughing as he casually jogged along, and all my brain could envision was how his hands would be around my neck any moment. I told myself that I had to run even faster, or he would wear my face like he did Barkton's. That was when I tripped, rolling across the leaf-strewn ground and right over the lip of the ravine. I smashed my head against a rock and didn't wake up for almost 2 days. When I regained consciousness, I was in the local hospital, and within seconds, my mom and girlfriend had their arms around me. It turns out that the man also tripped into the ravine, but he wasn't as lucky. The knife he was carrying had gotten lodged in his neck, and the coroner estimated that he bled out within 2 minutes. James was found safe about a mile away, and they were able to recover Barkton's body for a proper cremation. Later that night, Abe swung by to see me, and he filled me in on the man's background. His name was Bert Parker. He was only 19 years old, and he was a runaway from 2 towns over from ours. As a young child, he had been diagnosed as a sociopath, and he displayed conduct disorder behaviors typical of mentally deficient individuals. He had a history of violence against both people and animals, and he used to pluck the eyes out of his cousin Ernie's pet guinea pigs. His mother, who had to work 3 jobs just to keep their family from being homeless, hadn't known how badly things had progressed. Her last words to her son had been that she wished she had never birthed a monster, and that was what had caused him to run away from home. I still have nightmares about his terrifying mask, and I don't think I'll ever be free of the image of him wearing that cute dog's pelt. Small Town Assailant was written by Alana Robertson Webb and narrated by Erica Letitia.
Being a parent has its challenges, but I can definitely say being a mother can be very hard. We not only work and keep the house up, but we play caregiver to everyone even when we don't know it. Musey is a wife to her husband of 15 years, and they have 2 daughters, one 5 and the other 7. Their 7-year-old Jessie has always been independent, and Abby, her 5-year-old, follows behind her sister. She nearly does everything her sister does. It's so cute. The girls are always happy, as they should be, but the last couple weeks for Musey has been the strangest experience she's ever been in. Everything was fine until that day at the park. John, her husband, works hard, day in and day out. He hardly gets any real time off, but this time, he worked up enough hours to spend a few weeks off with his family. This made Musey really happy, and it felt wonderful to wake up to her husband. The day they went to the park, everything seemed normal. They saw the usual families, and the girls played on the playset with everyone else. Attempting to go slide down one of the poles, Musey ran to grab her 5-year-old before she fell. After helping her to the bottom, she noticed a little girl crying underneath the slide. "Hey, love, are you okay?" she asked. The little girl shook her head no, still crying. "Where's your mama? Do you see her here?" Musey asked. "No, I lost her. I haven't been able to find her for a long time," the little girl said. Musey looked at the little girl in her clothes. She looked about 6 years old and wore a blue tie-dye shirt, but it looked dirty and slightly torn at the neck. It was long enough to reach past her butt because it didn't seem like she had any shorts on. What really got her attention was her shoes. She only had one on, white with the blue pom-pom on it. "Where have I seen those shoes before?" she thought. Suddenly, the little girl sprung up and hid behind Musey. "What's the matter?" Musey said. "The officer is here. I don't want him to see me." Musey looked and saw no cop except for the old security guy who occasionally pops by. Musey turned back at the girl, but she was gone. Confused, she looked around for the little girl but saw her nowhere. She headed back to sit with her husband, who was still watching the girls. "Everything okay?" John asked. "Yeah, I was trying to help this kid, but she disappeared. I guess it's not a big deal, but she was wearing a blue tie-dye shirt with pom-poms on one of her shoes." "Tie-dye?" John said. "Man, I haven't seen tie-dye clothing worn since the 90s. We were all in elementary school at the time, remember?" Suddenly it hit her. Musey remembered exactly where she saw those shoes before. She pulled out her phone to call her mom, but suddenly her 7-year-old came running to them frantically. Mom, Dad! A man took Abby," she said, crying. John and Musey bolted to where this man snatched their daughter. "He just grabbed her. I tried to make him let go, but he shoved me down and ran off with her," Jessie said. They ran to the entrance of the park and saw the security guard with Abby placing her in his car. "Hey!" yelled John as he tackled the guard to the ground. Musey tried to open the door, but it was locked. She ran to the driver's side and saw the little girl from before sitting there. Musey banged on the window, asking her to open the doors. The little girl started pushing all the buttons on the door until the lock flipped. Musey grabbed Abby out of the seat and the police pulled up seconds later. It took a few people to pull John off the man, but thankfully he was arrested. After searching his car, they found several fake IDs in the glove compartment and a few old backpacks in his trunk. Turns out the guy was a pedophile on the run and had a warrant from 2 other states. He had a record reaching back to the 80s. After the police left, Musey saw the little girl once more by the tree, waving goodbye before disappearing. The following week was normal for the kids, but John and Musey was still shaken up by the incident. They were seconds from losing Abby and have since took the girls to an indoor play center instead of the park. While on the phone with her mom, Musey explained the whole situation, including the little girl that helped save the day. "You know what's really weird about the whole thing?" Musey said. "The police said that they got a call from a child that she was being kidnapped, gave the license plate number and the perfect description of the kidnapper. But it wasn't Jessie, and Abby's still too little to answer a call like that." "Maybe it was the little girl you mentioned," Mom said. "What does she look like again?" Musey gave her this girl's description, and there was a moment of silence on the phone. "Mom?" Musey said. "That little girl sounds a lot like the girl you played with at school when you were little. Don't you remember your friend from school? She always wore pom-poms on her shoes. Kimberly. Kimberly, I think that was her name," Mom explained. Looking through her mom's old albums, she found an old photo taken of her at the park. Then it came back to her. She did have a childhood friend that she used to be neighbors with. They were so close they sometimes wore the same outfits. "This photo was taken hours before Kimberly was abducted," Mom said. We had to leave early because you had a doctor's appointment that day. You were so upset when Kimberly disappeared, but you helped us during the search. The whole neighborhood was searching for her. Musey's memory felt like it blanked out. She really had no memory of the search or hearing that Kimberly was abducted. Well, did they ever find her? Silence fell between them again. Then Mom put her hand on Musey's. You really don't remember, do you? Hun, you were the one who found her body. What? Musey said, shocked at what she just heard. You found her. Hidden under the old bridge. The one I tell you to stay off of. She was there. Dead. Musey started tearing up, and then just had to ask that question. Mom, what was she wearing when I found her? Mom thought for a moment and then looked back at the photo. Most of her clothes were torn off, but she was found wearing a blue tie-dye shirt. Her pants and underwear were missing, but she only had one of her shoes on, the white ones with the blue pom-poms. This concludes this episode of Sinister Tales. Close Call was written by me for Musey, Modern Dreadfuls. I want to give her a shout out and encourage you to check out her channel listed below. Be sure to slash that subscribe button and hit the notification so you don't miss a thing. That's it for now, and I'll see you next time, my loves. Mwah.
My fetid friend, I wanted to thank you for listening, and I hope to see you again very soon in my fields.
This audio production is copyrighted by Scarecrow Tales. No copying or reproduction is permitted without the prior written permission of Scarecrow.